All right, I believe we are recording. Hello, Suzanne. Hi. Good to see you.
Okay, so good to get going. Okay, I'm sure I will butcher this a few times as we go on, so you guys can all keep me in check. So we'll go ahead and call to order, and we do attendee list first.
Yep.
So Bill Lesage, chair, present.
Suzanne Dirksen is present.
Jenny Nolan is present.
Peter Eckel is present.
Josh Newell, vice chair, present.
And then on the phone, we got a few folks.
Sean Lewis present.
Rita Russell present.
Tim Dodd.
All right, I think that's everybody online. So with that, we'll move on to approve the July 26th meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, so the minutes are approved. All right, so today's session is really just to kind of debrief from all of last year and the presentation. So I think Suzanne, I know you listened to it, or we were online, and I think it went well, just kind of from an overall. Too bad Q's not here, but overall presentation, I think it went well. I think it showed the work and the prep that we went in. I mean, there weren't a ton of questions, but I felt like, and we were able to. I felt like we were good because you weren't there and had a couple pieces, but we were all able to answer, on behalf of everybody that chimed in. So I felt that really showed that we were kind of all together and on the same page. So that was nice. We didn't have to defer any questions.
Hello.
Hey, Steve.
Nice to see you, Steve.
How's it going?
Great, how are you?
So yeah,
Then our Noonan camp somewhere, and she said it was really good.
okay.
So she was pleased with it.
So I don't know from if Member Russell or Member Ward who just walked in, but it walked in, just woke up, walked in. If from just the presentation itself, if there was any feedback from council that we may not have known about or anything.
I think the presentation was actually really well received. And I talked to you guys a little bit last month about some specifics, but in particular, the future focus was really helpful for us. It's a message I feel like I've been pushing for quite some time, but when it comes from a committee like yours, particularly in relation to the capital, it was really helpful in sort of deciding which projects we were going to invest in and which ones we were going to defer. So that was one of the critical elements. And then I will say it's always nice to see recognition of the year's accomplishments coming from one of our committees as well. And using that section really tells us, it's kind of a barometer of how well and how effectively we're using the city's money. So that was helpful to me as well.
Good.
And I would just like to weigh in. Also, I agree with everything Mayor Pro Tem Ward shared. I think the presentation was well received by council. I don't know that we received any feedback, but council overall was more receptive to use the suggestions that you all had for making the final decisions. And I believe this is really one of the best reports that the Budget Advisory Committee has put out.
Well, thank you. That's really great to hear.
I'm not expecting anyone else. We're not able to prop the doors open.
Q's not coming.
But we were going to be leaving, so I just want to make sure somebody doesn't get locked out.
And we'll watch for the door too.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you both for that feedback. I think that's helpful, and especially as we, kind of from a foundation perspective, as we head into this year, knowing that it was was well received, so I think that helps us as we move forward. Anything, I mean, it kind of gets into, before we get into the, I guess, the outline or necessarily specifically, but any thoughts on anything we want to, look at doing differently or approaching differently? I know this was a new format and new approach for this year. And especially for folks who had been through on the previous cycles, there's a big change where I didn't know the change other than just seeing the presentation. Anything that stands out?
I was gonna say, Tim and Sean, what feedback, if any, have you received from the departments that we can use, thinking both, how we presented to council and what they saw and what they were aware of, but also how we interacted with them over the last year? And because I like the approach, I think, tying it to the Englewood outcomes, and even though the report didn't do that, I think that's an opportunity to think about next year is how we can better align it. But there was some limitations from what we were doing this year. But I'm just kind of curious about what the city staff had thought about the process.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Tim, I think, did more coordination with the departments on that. So Tim, do you have any feedback on it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh. And I actually did not receive any specific feedback from departments about it, which I guess maybe is a good thing. And that there didn't seem to be pushback. Yeah, there didn't seem to be
honestly,
pushback.
Jackie. Sorry, I was going to say that Jackie or Jenny may have gotten more feedback than we did.
Unfortunately, I didn't get any direct feedback, but we can definitely check with Jackie. But so I would say, I would have to echo, no news is good news.
Well, and maybe as start planning formally, which, who's going to be presenting on what nights, that can be a question just to kind of informally ask, is there any feedback that they could either provide to him or to us during the meeting? Right?
I was just gonna add real quick. I'm glad it was well received, and I feel like if we follow through on what we put in the presentation, then I would hope that would give us a good basis for next year to sort of update that report. I'm sure we'll have some new issues to address.
Yep. And I think it was interesting, I think just the way the timing worked, but interesting with, we were able to tie in with the ballot measures, which, because they're, from a budget perspective, because it sounds like there really hasn't been those in the past. So that, I think that was good. That was interesting. And we know that they're, right, the Pirates Cove bond is up, so that could come around to us next year as well to provide our feedback on that as well. So I think just something to keep in mind. And I think the mayor also chimed in that he appreciated that feedback as well from us. So I think that was good to hear.
I appreciated that this year's report carried forward some items from last year's report to really demonstrate some continuity, that that wasn't just a point in time report that was issued in 2021, and that those topics and issues are still a priority for this committee.
Yeah,
I think that was a strength.
I agree.
that's a good point.
And this is going to be a really interesting year, because this is, I think, the first year in a long time that the BAC is taking continuity of membership from cycle to cycle. Like, since I've joined, every single site or every single window, we've had new members coming in. So we've all been around for a year. We've all seen it, and we're all sticking around for at least the next stage of it. So I think that'll be really strong for what we can take to continue to build on that continuity, because it's not having to go back and read other people's works. We all lived through it. And so we can help Suzanne with the historical knowledge. It's not dependent on her now.
No fault of her.
Yeah, we don't have anybody that's been here for 8 years. Completely.
Are you at 8 years? Are you at 8 years?
No, Steve served for.
So Steve was,
Yeah, I know he was helped start
was
it.
the first person to officially term out of BAC for serving for so long.
Thinking about our old group, the pilot group, I think we had first 2 years the same group.
Yeah.
And then year 3, we started to switch out members a bit.
Yeah, and you didn't even term out, you were promoted.
I was a year out, yeah,
Yeah.
so I was close.
You're on your last cycle.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any other kind of from a debrief before we start? I mean, I know we'll talk about meeting schedule, but we may just want to move right into kind of talking about the schedule outline for next year. But anything else we want to talk through from last year?
I did have a question. Are there any departments that didn't get a chance to present? And I'm just asking that because that might be something we want to think about in our scheduling for this year.
I think we actually had everybody meet. I
Nice.
think that was the first time we had all departments meet.
Oh, great, perfect.
Especially aligning it to the outcomes, I think help facilitate that, and Tim's great job scheduling all of it to
Yeah.
know which ones were gonna be shorter, and we could do multiple in a night, so.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it made it easy, I found, when I went back getting ready for the report and things like that, to go back through, because it was like, everything was grouped together, so it made it really nice to go back through. That's, I think, simplified things a little bit. Didn't seem as overwhelming when going back through and going through notes and stuff. All right, I mean, do we want to move back? Do we want to move into, if we hold off on the meeting schedule for a second and just kind of move into planning for next year? And we can talk about meetings at the end. I think that'll take too long. I mean, is there, so we'll taking into consideration if there was no feedback from staff, we assume that all kind of went well. From an order perspective, I don't, I think we're kind of open on what order the staff wants to present in, whatever works best, with everybody's schedules. So I don't know if, Tim, if you'll be running with that, or Jenny, do you help run with that? Or?
Yeah, I'm happy. Last year was really a collaboration between CMO and finance, so happy to collaborate on that again.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be good. One thing I don't know if we had kind of talked about, but I don't know if we ever really did, was go back to the groups and say, is there anything, kind of any last words? We talked about doing that, but I don't think we ended up doing it.
Talked about doing like a roundtable
Yeah.
or open house
Yeah.
type
Where they could pass
conversation.
along, items to Jenny or Tim or,
Yeah.
so maybe we just need to make it a better point to do that, kind of going back to, we know people are presenting early on and things change, so. And will this start in September, to the next run?
We can, yep.
So part of the, I think mandate is we get the annual update from finance, and they haven't been a part of, that was kind of,
Yes.
where we started out last year. Last year was very high level. Jenny, that great presentation showing the fund accounting. I'd say a refresher on that, but also a little bit more in depth. I would love to hear about, some of the things that were implemented, big projects, and rather than be, kind of a general accounting or government accounting 101, kind of a half that, half here's the cool stuff that we're doing, the major things. I'm really interested in, kind of the conversations where alternative funding sources can come from. What are the approaches, what are the realities around there, both from grants, talking about that, but also, this is the first time we're using bond issuances. How frequent do those happen? What are the strategies around there? And that's kind of that, expanded section. So I'd say that's a good starting point. We've got the 7 areas, probably 8 to 9 nights, depending on how that gets scheduled. Scheduling an extra meeting and I think being more thoughtful around capital projects, because we were kind of scrambling and dealing with the email stuff you know, what can be emailed versus what needs to be happen. So that would be the other consideration as we go through thinking about the schedule for the next year.
Yeah, I had that's a good point. I'd forgotten about the updates and findings. That was really helpful. And probably some good discussion, like you said, that we can add to that. And then, yeah, the extra meeting, I don't know if we want to formally plan that now for around the time that the SIP presentation happens. And then in addition to that, you know, we can play it by ear, but July, do we want to formally put on an extra session, kind of a working session to go through the report, or do we want to just play it by ear? Probably for the July one, I'm more just let's play it by ear, but I know for SIP, because that was December, wasn't it? Was it December or was it after the holidays? I can't remember now, the SIP presentation.
I feel like it was later.
No, it was later.
March,
okay.
around March-ish, or no, May for capital projects presentation. We spent June writing that report, or doing that, and then funneled right into July for the annual report.
I don't
For
feel
the joint session for the Capitol, that was in April.
Well, April,
Yeah,
okay.
it's after the Easter holiday.
Some kind of holiday.
I don't feel strongly. I feel that as I sit right here, I feel that I would prefer to schedule ad hoc meetings as the need arises, and I don't know that we can identify that need right now.
So Tim and Jenny, as you guys are working together, I'd say that meeting after the capital projects all committee session, have that one not be presentations, but that could be our working group for evaluating capital projects, and then fill up the rest of the time with the presentations.
So around the May timeframe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll schedule probably an ad hoc from that meeting, depending on how late that one goes,
Yeah.
as we're hitting that 6:30 and
Yeah.
not kind of just lose momentum. I hope we lost a little bit of momentum by not being proactive about scheduling that follow-up meeting at that time.
And I think this is where we'll go a little, you know, we talked a lot about just like, you know, things we want to see and things we didn't understand. I think some of that will be in it this year. No doubt we'll have more discussion like that, but I think, you know, we'll just understand the format and such like that, having been through it, so that'll help.
We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we also know how we know each other better and how we operate and what our
Yeah,
individual priorities are.
Yeah.
I thought we all did a good job on, you know, working through the Google Docs, and that kept us out of having, you know, additional meetings and such, but that all seemed to work really well too.
Could we circle back just on a follow-up on that capital improvement prioritization? I think that the committee ultimately decided to kind of let individual distinctions or differences be reflected. And I guess I'm just curious, is there a benefit to actually coming up with a group position? I can say I personally am happy to have my priorities not come out on top in many cases, if the group feels clearly, and I'm just wondering if that sends perhaps a stronger, more singular message about really what we prioritize. Because certainly when we write the report, we are unanimous in our support of that report. So I'm just curious what the group thinks, and I'd love to hear what counselors think as well.
It's always nice to have just one opinion to kind of evaluate. But on the other hand, when a committee like this committee is not able to come to consensus on something like capital projects, it really is a signal to council that, you know, there might not just be one way to do it. So it helps illustrate to council and to the public, in my opinion, that, you know, there are multiple approaches and there are a bunch of different opinions on what we should do. And ultimately, at some point, we have to exercise our authority and decide how the money is going to be spent. So there are costs and benefits to either approach. Some of my fellow council members, I'm sure, would prefer receiving less information and having just a unified approach. But I think the message that we didn't come to consensus sends is also helpful in its own right.
And I think it was a combination of two things. Like, we didn't have a meeting schedule coming out of it. We were under deadlines. I think we were even past a couple of deadlines, and thank you guys for your patience on your end with it. And so it was kind of a little bit easier to just provide all of our opinions. But the benefit that we had discussed was, you know, Englewood's 35,000 people. There's not going to be a single consistent system, one size fits all. And a lot of the discussion was, what great program do we feel we have to cut because of the budget constraints? And so showing that, the diversity of our internal group thought with the aggregate roll-up scores, so you could either see a single score or see it. And we could take that into kind of feedback for next year and how we present it. Maybe we present a summary sheet with that single score and then have the data sheet behind the scenes. So depending on how they want to interact with it, it's a little bit more flexible to interact. And might be that good balance between the two, stances.
I like that both end approach.
Yeah. And maybe if there's areas where we're just not aligning on, maybe we highlight that.
Yeah.
We don't have just a bullet or so and say, this is why we didn't, because that may help, as well.
Calling it out specifically on the summary sheet, and then they can dive into it a little bit more deep if need be.
Yeah.
I agree. I could see value, and I would love to send a unified message. I think it's going to make council's job easier. But even if we're unified on like 5 really big projects, and then there's just a hodgepodge where we're like, you know what, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another.
I think we ultimately probably came pretty unified because of that extra money.
Yeah.
Like
which $100,000 project did we sacrifice to win that
Right.
$100,000 project?
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the tier 1 projects honestly are no-brainers for council. It's like, we've kicked this can down the road the last 5 years. It's getting done. We have to do it. So some of that on the tier 2 and tier 3, some of that feedback of, this is what we think is important is helpful in pushing some of that other money in the right direction.
It looks like member Russell had an item too.
Yeah, I was gonna say on that, that information would be incredibly useful as well. Like knowing where you guys are saying like this one historically what we gotta get it done.
Right.
Like knowing that, because if that's it and we don't see any major reason to say anything about it, we're gonna be in alignment, and it allows us more productive conversations with the rest of the dollars.
Awesome.
Too.
Yeah, we'll look for that in the future.
Yeah, like the Oxford Bridge Street project comes to mind.
Member Russell, you had your hand raised?
Yes, I did, and I appreciate the discussion. I do like a unified message, but I do think there is some, what you were talking about in sharing why you couldn't come to consensus. I think that would help council also, but when your message is more unified, just like council takes a vote, and the majority always wins, but the council members that weren't supporting the win, they share why they didn't vote that way. So I think both would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. That's good feedback.
And I think we can be a little bit more descriptive with those differences and actually add more context, because it was just numbers on a page.
Yep, agreed, yep.
And did you all appreciate the more subjective opinion we share that we definitely favor projects that improve accessibility or that benefit from a match or a grant?
I think that was one of the big takeaways of the process. And I think, I can't speak for Councilmember Russell, but I definitely benefited from being in the room and listening to you guys work through that process, because it brought to mind some of the things that I should be considering as I'm making that decision as well.
And that might not be our message next year. It could be something else, like we favor projects that benefit transportation, or right of way, or something along those lines. But if we can.
We're gonna talk about roundabouts this year. Thanks, Carmel, Indiana, in your case study about roundabouts.
So you're saying kind of highlight a theme or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Part of it is just
Because there certainly was this year.
And I don't know that my opinion will change next year.
No, but yeah, no, I
more
like that idea.
subjective context.
Yeah.
Fascinating case study. I can't wait.
All right.
Steve's got some opinions. I'm excited for that conversation.
It's not the first time roundabouts have come up in conversation in this room.
Okay.
I can't wait.
All right, so we'll plan on ad hoc meetings. Got some good feedback. I took some notes so we can pick it back up when we start talking through SIP. So that I guess going back to September, so are we, because the review that you did last year was, it was kind of a general overview,
It was,
right?
yeah.
So do we want to go through that again? I know Peter wasn't here for that, so that might be beneficial. And I could certainly use a refresher. So I got the focus, and then just maybe more conversation and such with Jenny, Jackie, and group.
I'd say that's a great starting point.
So we had the annual update, and then alternative funding sources to talk through. And then,
in terms of the big projects, it's more of the capital projects.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd say the big capital projects that we're focusing on, true projects, not the programs.
Yep.
do you think that's doable or for next month? Okay, cool.
Yep.
And then that would take us to October.
Yep.
If my math is correct. And then we would start the presentations. That would give a little opportunity for staff to, get that aligned and everybody kind of start to schedule.
And you'd like to leave that to us to schedule and to determine the sequencing of the presentations?
Yeah, does anyone disagree with that?
Outcomes.
I want to be flexible to staff, so
Okay.
whatever works best.
I think it worked great last year, and
Okay.
I really appreciate the work you guys did to set that up.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And are there any from, it's listed up here on the screen, but, kind of the questions asked, going through it the first time, I thought it was helpful. Most of the presentations were pretty short, to the point. It was easy to digest, I'll say. Is there anything differently we want to ask or put in here kind of from an outline perspective?
I would like to keep, it's a question and a comment, I'd like to keep funds returned to fund balance, but I feel like most of the explanation behind the funds that were returned to the fund balance were pretty justifiable.
They were.
Like we were gonna buy this thing, but that thing wasn't available until the next fiscal year, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to keep that, and then maybe we just need to make a mental note to revisit it, those responses.
Yeah.
When we write the report and see if there is something that stands out, because that didn't really inform our report much.
And if I remember that City Manager Lewis and Assistant City Manager, I think you two brought that up. And I think it had been asked in the past, but I know that was highlighted as, a good point, a good topic. I don't know if you have any feedback on that as well.
On the funds returned to fund balance?
Yeah,
I think that was new.
that was new? Okay.
Last year,
That
yeah.
was new. Because it did seem
Yeah,
all
I found it
sequenced.
very helpful also.
Okay,
Sorry, I found that very helpful also.
I think that's important. And then help needed from BAC. And this could just be situational with new directors, but I feel like some directors didn't really understand that question, who we are and what we do. So I don't know if we could rephrase that to how can the BAC advocate for you?
And
Do you have anything that you would like to see featured in the BAC's annual report? Something along those lines.
what if we asked what would they do with the 10% increase in budget? Because that's going to identify their priorities and where they want help.
Was that a question before?
Yeah, so what we had asked before is, what would cause the most pain to your department if you experienced a budget decrease? And what would you do if you had a spontaneous budget increase?
I have to say, I think that's a really unique way to present some things that's maybe hidden behind the scenes that we don't have necessarily any material to know
Yeah.
without them giving feedback. I think that's really cool. I like those two questions.
And it's a little bit more, help needed from the BAC is kind of a yes/no question.
Nothing, we're good. We were not part of the presentation
Well-
last year. Well, I'm not sure
Well, and there's that.
Yeah, so maybe,
Maybe we just do a creative question every year.
yeah, I just don't think, I
I
think
mean-
a few directors simply didn't understand that question is how can we advocate for you? How can we help you? What help do you need from us? They just didn't know what we do or how we report to council. So maybe we reframe the question
Yeah.
to that 10% budget shift. You know, it actually helps them quantify their response.
I do like using the word advocate better. I think that's good. I mean, even to kind of mix it in with that, but that, you know, just kind of highlights. Because I did, as you bring that up, there were times where I felt between challenges faced, the capital projects, and then the help needed from BAC, it was all kind of in together, you know. Because sometimes I felt the challenges faced, I was like, well, those are areas that we should probably, you know, we may want to consider helping out with.
Yeah.
What's your biggest risk moving forward? Sorry, James, you
Respect the
said.
budget.
Oh, I was just gonna say, related to challenges faced, I like that one of the presentations, and I forget which one it was, she also talked about like biggest accomplishments. So it was an opportunity to look at things that they were really pleased with, and I think that gives some insight as well as challenges into things that are going well, because we may very much want to continue supporting that.
So could that take over department overview to give a little bit more direction on what the department overview is, you know, kind of what was your biggest accomplishment of the last year?
Or at least include it. So-
Well, I think the department overview is good, so we know exactly
Yeah.
what that department does. Like Maria DeAndre will always say, Public Works is about right of way. And that helps my brain understand what Public Works does. Or like when Peter Van Rye talks about when he's wearing his South Pat Renew hat versus his utilities hat, like you know exactly where those departments begin and ends. I like the department overview.
Yeah, I think it'll help new members too. You know, like if, you know, I mean, obviously this year we're in good shape, but you know, as time goes on.
So maybe even a subset under department overview and accomplishments over the last year? Or would you do it as a standalone?
There were some, but they weren't accomplishments in the presentation. So they went through I guess that was the projects, right? There was usually color coding on where they were at, but that wasn't necessarily accomplishments. It was, I mean, I guess it was, some of it was, because there were some completed items in there that they were highlighting, or at least on the presentation.
How about something like this? Which budgetary line items, projects, initiatives do you want to protect? Is that what we're asking?
I guess I was asking more retrospectively than forward, which when I think about what do you want to protect, that's going forward,
Okay.
which I think is a great question.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, where have you been? Where are you now?
Mhm.
Where would you like to go?
I kind of like that, just exactly the way you said
So
it.
I simplified it, but
So we'll keep outcome overview. What was the outcome overview?
Strategic plan outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was Tim's
Yep.
time to shine, and shine he did throughout the year.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just the general overview of like what infrastructure and transportation is, and
Yeah.
the statement for each and the key goals, that kind of thing.
And so we'll keep funds returned to fund balance, right? We wanted to reword that, what's the thought? Or we keep it as?
No opinion.
I mean, it's great information. I expect it always to have great answers to why funds are returning to fund balance, but
Yeah.
it's more of, you know, I don't want to say check the box, but it's kind of just a maintenance check, making sure there's nothing leaking or anything that should be addressed. So, you know, kind of thinking about what it's for as a question, I think it's great as is.
Yeah, I think it too kind of shapes the overall picture that we're trying to get, so.
And then, so challenges faced, I mean, is this one where we start tying into kind of the new questions?
Yeah, challenges faced and help needed from the back are kind of in
Yeah.
the same category.
Do we say, so if we're gonna talk about accomplishments, I think this would be good to have up front.
I agree.
Kind of, I really maybe after the overview, department overview.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think it's a mindset too, which to me is a positive mindset.
Biggest accomplishments over the past year.
Yeah.
And then we can then go into the fund balance.
That's gonna be really good to be able to pull through for the report too, as we're hearing from departments.
That's true. And then,
So kind of the challenges faced and help needed from BAC, I think that's great for where have you been, where are you now, where do you want to go?
Yeah, and I think if the question stays or not doesn't necessarily matter to me, but I feel like if we do ask maybe a question that sort of doesn't have a defined answer, but certainly has some defined goal, like maybe it's if the 10% cut, and how can we tie in that question per se if we use it to what some of our budget council initiatives and strategies are for the budget outcome. And I think it's nice to give the departments maybe some metric to start by that's realistic to our outcome for the next year's budget, so that we can sort of have some measurement across the departments, and it might help us prioritize when we set that capital budget. Just my thoughts.
yeah, agreed. I guess, do we keep it, I like challenges phase, I want to make sure they call it, maybe we do just, maybe we keep that, and then how can BAC advocate for you?
I don't think they understood that question.
Well, because ultimately everything they're telling us, we decide how we can advocate for them. Like there's an element of that's, you know, kind of why we're going through this process to understand what we as citizens want to advocate for. But the overlap between challenges faced and the help needed was palpable for most presentations, like almost point to point. And so what's the right way to say, like, you know, just tell us how it is, like what's going on today, what are you facing, where do you want to go, and tying those two into the same questions after funds return to the fund balance, and it could even go before funds return to the fund balance, but having a generic enough question to cast a wide net, but also say, like, tell us what's going on, what are your struggles, what do you need in an ideal world. If you could paint a brush, what would it look like?
Yeah, and to me, the challenges faced and the help needed line item really could probably be one, since it's finishing the conversation, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree. This is kind of verbose, but what challenges did you face over the past year, and what do you want to solve for next year?
So what if we just said, in an ideal world, what would your budget, changes look like for next year? And in theory, that should address both the challenges that they're facing and what they want out of it, because they've got to have a reason for wanting more money. That's going to bring up the challenge. And so, kind of money aside, ideal world, what would you put into place?
Yeah, and I felt like we got some really good answers to the challenges questions in the presentations I was at.
It just got to the help needed from BAC, and it just kind of dropped off at that. Or it was a repeat of the challenges, help us solve the challenges, and so.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what staff can go back to, the group with
Well, maybe we need to present them with some things that we can offer.
I guess I'm
look like
a paragraph in the report.
I don't know.
I'm just thinking of the phrase of it.
One of their responses was like, advocate in your community and with your neighbors, which, I mean, sounds great, but I'm not going to do that actively. That's going to be a passive process, and I'm just going to do that because I'm an engaged citizen.
We already did,
Yeah.
So,
But my responsibility as a member of the Budget Advisory Committee is to make sure it's written into that report. Or when I'm having a coffee meeting with Member Ward, I might say, what stood out to me in that meeting we had with so-and-so.
So what if we just got rid of the help needed from BAC question? Like challenges faced kind of addresses what we need. It's been giving us enough.
Okay.
And we can see it as a standalone question for the next year.
Cool. And then keep top 3 capital. I like the top 3. I thought that was helpful.
Yeah.
So where are we at? What have you typed?
So, I mean, I think really it's all the same. I mean, it's generally the same. Outcome overview, which is the strategic planning, the department overview, biggest accomplishments over the past year, funds return to fund balance, challenges faced, top 3 capital projects.
I like it.
I think it covers everything.
There is one big issue coming up on the horizon that I don't know if now's an appropriate time to discuss it or not, but the city center redevelopment process is potentially very expensive. And it would be helpful, I think, from my perspective, to know more about what the citizens think about that process and what types of investments we should or potentially should not make. I know that's still largely on the drawing board right now, but it's forthcoming.
Where does that fit into our meeting schedule? How would that fit into our meeting schedule? Is that like a city manager presentation? Is it an ad hoc meeting that gets wedged into the middle?
I think you could probably do that one early because there are some initial plans or, some initial ideas in place relative to cost. And if your recommendation was going to be to pump the brakes, that would be information that we would need very, very quickly, I think.
Very quickly into early next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that the Downtown Redevelopment Committee has been involved in?
Yeah, they're part of that as well.
Okay.
And some of that will likely involve work that they do. But there's going to be, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm guessing there's going to be significant investment directly from the city coffers as well, or potentially, either in the form of land or cash or both.
And I'm just asking in the sense of, would it, and I don't know if there's a precedent for this, but maybe a joint meeting with them or something like that?
I think things and then you say them.
Yeah, we're both having visions.
So you often say, oh, what Chelsea said?
I usually say what Suzanne said. We're just swapping roles.
Yeah, I just think that would be one that would fit well into the schedule, possibly early on. And it's not like necessarily, community development might be the place to start there. So if you wanted to invite them in early in the cycle, that might spur some future discussion.
Are you looking for maybe an early, and again, I don't think this has been done, but instead of, by the time August rolls around, that's gonna be too late, it sounds like. That's something that we come up with an opinion on, and input on more formally, early next year that, a one-off report, or I didn't want to see a report, I don't think it'd have to be that.
That might be right for an issue brief, but I don't want to direct the committee in a direction you're not interested in going. It's just a suggestion, something that might be helpful, at least from my personal perspective as a council member. More input from the community on that topic would be helpful.
What does Member Russell think about this?
I'm not sure what I really think. That kind of caught me off guard. Right now, I do think it's something that the public is interested in. I mean, I've gotten a fair amount of feedback in the last year about different things the public thinks about it. And I think that as the Budget Advisory Committee, it would be more from the citizen perspective that you would need to look at. So I'm not exactly sure how staff would like this done, though. So I don't know that I can give you a whole lot of feedback. I think if and I don't know if you should do it, you all need to talk amongst yourself about whether you want to do it as a committee or as individuals. So I don't know that I can help you with that.
I would say based off the size and scope of the project and the impact of the budget moving forward, it definitely is something I'd say falls under we as a committee, having the opportunity to comment on it and provide our citizen voice. My big question, and this might be for Tim as you're scheduling it, is, and Mayor Pro Tem Ward, is the project itself and the presentation, because it's not going to be the normal presentation flow, it's a little bit different. Is it big enough to justify a standalone meeting dedicated to it, or is it something that would fall in under, as you were referencing, community well-being and be a part of that, strategic outcome meeting that night? And that's where I think opinions from council and Mayor Pro Tem on when to schedule it independently as a standalone or as a part of something else.
So this is just a suggestion. Obviously, do whatever you want, but the economy section has a goal. So the economy outcome area has a goal that is city center redevelopment. So if you would like to spend more time on it, I would say also that area is relatively light on other projects and mostly ties to community development, which was the lead department talking about this anyways. So I think it probably could fit if you wanted to do a meeting just dedicated to community development and economy. Just based on what I know of the other three goals, I think in that section, you probably would have some time to focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, in thoughts, I think that makes sense. And just prioritize them, as soon as they can. And then I think we can determine off of that, maybe we'll just make it an agenda item, whether we want, how we want to provide any input and gather that up. If we did it early on, it gave us a little bit of time if we wanted to formalize something and provide something back to council.
I agree with that.
Anyone disagree or have other thoughts? Okay.
Actually, can I just make a comment? I really like what Deputy City Manager shared. I think from that perspective, it would be a great idea, and maybe, some information to council along those lines, because it is going to impact the budget, I believe. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
So definitely be a part of the report at the end of the year, knowing that it's just a major thing. But also, if we need to offer that issue brief at the time, we can make the decision to pull that through and keep it timely for you guys. And then even potentially look as we move through the year, if we need an update on it as we're getting closer to the report.
Yeah, that sounds good. And no more extra meetings, so that's
I'm sure we'll find an excuse.
Well, thank you for chiming in there, Assistant City Manager. That was helpful. Okay, so I think we've gone through our questions. We feel pretty good about that. Is there any other input or anything, or kind of going along, items that we should focus on or to highlight as we think about going into next year, even if it's not an agenda item formally, but anything to kind of keep in the back of our minds that might be upcoming?
And I'm sorry, I should have brought this up when we were actually discussing the topic of the department lineup, but I'm wondering if there would be merit to having like police and public works present after the initiative results are in, because I think that may really affect. So for instance, if an initiative fails, I think it'd be interesting to hear, okay, what's their alternative plan or that kind of a thing. Sorry.
No, there's some woo there.
I'm having a rare evening here, so.
We're enjoying it, so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think we did have them, we had them earlier this year, I believe. Well, at least the police did.
Public Works early.
Public Works was early, police
Police
was,
came
Police came late.
came later.
Yeah.
But agreed, I think that would, to do that in December or after makes sense. Because you're right, that will have an impact on the discussion for sure.
And our report certainly, because we may have some recommendations if there need to be some alternate approaches.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, that makes sense. So I think September we focus on update from finance, kind of funding sources discussion, maybe some SIP discussion, and kind of some more planning, and then go into, I think if we can, community development and economy, or try to do that October or September, October. And then, yeah, I think maybe just consideration from staff if we could do police and public works after the ballot result is really good input. Otherwise, I think we said we didn't have an opinion, now we do. on the
Yeah, and the other things
of
that
the order.
they come up throughout the year that might shift our timeline a little bit, or we might have to revisit is when grant funding does come in, or when council makes a vote on something. I know there's I'm forgetting the term, but it's some kind of a budget adjustment.
Oh, supplemental?
Thank you, supplemental. Sometimes we might need to circle back and talk about issues after council votes one way or another.
Well, and, proactively, if you guys are ever considering a supplemental and you want some consideration, let us know, because then we can powwow at that next meeting and members' choice or something like that and be able to cover it. And because it seemed like a lot of it was, there was a little bit of a disconnect. We'd be talking about something that was like, oh yeah, that happened last week. And so I think that would help solve that a little bit.
Like that WIFIA funding comes to mind, like we heard about it and then we didn't even need to speak to it because council had already decided on it, which was great, but it's just a shift in the timing.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else from a presentation perspective or order of presentation? All right, then I think we'll move on to, well, it's both an agenda topic was the meeting schedule and into members' choice. I asked Jenny to move it into its official agenda item because the note that starting in September, we were going to move the meeting. I thought we had decided to keep it the same because it conflicted with Code Next, was it? Is that right?
I have it the 1st and 3rd
Okay,
Tuesday.
okay.
So we're not meeting on the 3rd.
We're staying on the 4th Tuesday
Staying on the
because of the
4th
Code
Tuesday.
Next conflict, and we don't want to exclude it.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I
Oh,
thought we
that's
were moving to
okay.
the 3rd.
We had lots of talk on it, so that's why
Yeah.
I was like, let's just make sure we go back through it. So, okay, so meeting stands as is, so meet again September at the same time.
27th.
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 Yeah.
All right. Any other topics that anybody has to bring up?
Looking forward to the block party on Saturday.
Yeah.
Stop by the council booth.
Oh, goody.
Will do.
We need a back booth.
No. I also went to a movie at the park at Bellevue Park, and it rained, but I stuck it out. But I was really impressed with, I don't know, the setup. I'm glad we have those. So I'm glad we also spoke to it in our report as part of the recognition.
Nice. I'll add, I went to the South Platte Renew event. It was awesome. I saw Steve in there. And that was really cool. And they said, if I talked to John, he was doing the tour, he said, if y'all ever want to come back, let us know. Yeah. It was quite impressive, I have to say. And they do a phenomenal job. It seems that they're ahead of a lot of other districts that are close to us, for sure. So.
When he said that, like, if you ever want to come back, was it like just pop in sometime and we'll show you around, or is there somebody that we might reach out to?
I just sent a thank you email to Erin Bartlett.
Okay.
And so she emailed me back. I haven't read it yet. So I'll let you know next meeting.
I believe they do formal tours.
They do.
Yeah.
And yeah, either one of us liaisons can arrange that if the committee's interested.
Might be a fun event.
Yeah, I think it would be cool. I did add just a little side note that might be of interest to us in the future. So.
And really, I mean, we could get spouses and kids to go. I mean,
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
it's, why we'd actually, my wife and I had talked about taking the kids there sometime, because, well, we wanted to go, so they were gonna interact with us.
Yeah.
But we were interested in seeing it, we just couldn't go to that day.
Yeah, I was actually kind of bummed to miss it, so.
Allen is another really good one that our community doesn't get to see nearly as often because they do open houses at South Platte, but I don't think there's ever been an open house at Allen. When I first came on the council, I asked for a tour. It's a pretty interesting facility.
That might be fun to do. All right, any other topics? All right, well, thank you all. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great first meeting.
Well, it's-
Have a good night.
Good
Two.
night.
Okay.
Oops.
The back field trip.
I think it'd be fun, make it a family
Yeah.
event, like you
Yeah.
said. I mean, and John was,